Here's what you're going to need. Some canned food and a plastic container with a screw-off lid. You should pick a plastic container that will easily fit inside the can with room to spare. You will also need plaster of Paris, a can opener, and the can opener should be one that cuts the lid on the edge, not the top. You will also need some sandpaper and some epoxy. Take your can of food and turn it upside down. You will now take your can opener and open the lid. Remove the lid, empty out the contents, and wash the can out and the lid very well. With the side cutting can opener, you can see the lid fits nice on the can. And once again, as you can see, the plastic container fits nicely into the can with room to spare. Take the lid and note the outside of the lid, which is kind of concaved, and the inside of the lid, which is kind of convexed. Place the inside of the lid up. You're now going to take your plastic container with the lid on, and you're going to epoxy the container on the lid, making sure the container is exactly centered on the lid. And you will put a weight on it and let the epoxy set up. We will now prep the can lid and the container lid for the epoxy by taking your sandpaper and scoring and roughing up the can lid and the container lid. Rough it up really well. The reason we do this is because the epoxy will adhere to a rougher surface than it will to a smooth surface. And you're going to want this to be firm against each other. I am using a 2-part epoxy. It's very strong and adheres very well. I am going to put some on the lid of the can. And then, of course, like I said before, I'm going to center perfectly the container upside down to where both lids are touching, and I will weight this down and let it set up. Mix the epoxy very well. Now you will put the epoxy on the lid, a liberal amount. You'll have to judge how much on your own to where it's not going to come out the sides. And if it does, well, you just take a rag and wipe it up. Make sure you place the jar perfectly center on the can lid. Place a heavy object on the container and let it sit until the epoxy has cured. I like to keep my mixed container of epoxy, and I usually use it to test to see when it's cured. I will probably let this sit for at least an hour, even though this is 5-minute epoxy. It's been about an hour. I'm going to test the lid. Now I'm mixing the plaster of Paris with water until it's the consistency of pancake batter. You will now pour the plaster of Paris in the can, making sure that when you put the container inside, it sinks down into the plaster of Paris to where it covers all the way around, about halfway up. Set the container in, pushing it into the plaster of Paris, making sure that the top is in the right position and fits perfect on the can. Now you will place something heavy on top and let it set up overnight. So I've let it set all night. I've taken the weight off. Now I'm going to show you the inside. Test the container by pulling on it, turning on it, see if you can move it. This one's in here really well, so I'm just going to leave it alone. If the container does come out, what I do is I put epoxy around the outside and on the bottom, put the lid back on it, put a weight back on it in place, and let it cure for an hour or two. And then you should have no problem. But this one is not coming out, and that's the whole point, so I'm just going to leave this one alone. Turned out really well. Diversion safes are very useful in the home, on vacations. You can make different sizes of them. I made one out of this tomato paste can. Be sure to pick the proper can for the proper environment. It wouldn't make sense to have a fruit can in your medicine cabinet. So pick wisely on where you want to hide your valuables in plain sight. Enjoy making your own.